Hey Internet, Dan Corrigan here to talk to you about all things bass. So a lot of people have been asking me lately, how do I go about recording session bass tracks for people, whether it's at home or in a studio? And I thought I'd make a couple videos breaking that down. So this will be the first in a series of videos called How It's Made, Fire Bass Tracks. Yeah, so the first video I'm going to make here is going to be more about some of the nerdy stuff about how to get set up for this. We're going to be going over signal flow, kind of how to get the ideas from your head through an instrument into a computer out to a client, and kind of a lot of the hangups that happen along the way, common mistakes to avoid, and how to kind of do this properly with also kind of minimal gear. You know, I don't want to be one of those YouTube music producers being like, yeah, so you need, 10 million preamps, 26 basses, they all got to be boutique. No, we're gonna try to keep this simple to the point, how to get this done effectively. Honestly, each step in the process could be its own video on its own, but we're just gonna go over the basics of each step. Okay, so you're a bass player, which means you're gonna need a bass. Let's grab one. Okay, so this by far is the most important part of your rig. This is your bass. This is the first thing that comes in the way between what's in your head and what's on the tape. So definitely, this is where you should be trying to diagnose any problems you run into. That being said, it doesn't have to be a boutique instrument. It doesn't have to be custom shop. This is case in point. This is the bass I use for most of my recordings. This is a 2018 Mexican-made Fender P bass. It's not fancy, it's not custom shop, it's not boutique, but it gets the job done. The main things to watch out for are things like obviously fret buzz, so like that's the sound of not pushing down the frets hard enough. You want to make sure your bass is set up, the action's right, all the setup on your instrument's correct, so you don't run into that. You get nice full round notes. The other main thing to watch out for is in the electronics, you want to make sure your input jack is good. That's the most common thing to fail on a bass is the input jack. You'll get a lot of crackling and stuff like that. A lot of times the pots can get a little crackly when you're turning them up and down. Obviously, if you're not adjusting volume on the fly, that's not much of an issue. Make sure that they either work, or if they are a little crackly, make sure you're not tweaking on the fly. Also, if you play an active bass like this Warwick here, you will have a little battery compartment in the back like this. You always want to make sure that battery is nice and fresh, and obviously all the connections in there are good as well. Yeah, because same thing, if your battery's not fresh, you're going to run into a lot of issues as well. Your bass is also the first place you get to start shaping your tone, and I do recommend take advantage of that. This is the first step between you and your audience. You want to do as much tone shaping as you can here. One, by the way you play, but also whatever controls you have available on your bass. So for example, this P bass here, got this tone knob, rolled all the way off, you get that James Jameson kind of sound. Rolled all the way up, you can go as hard as even like a Steve Harris kind of. Shape your tone of the bass. There's a lot you can do here. And it's always better to shape earlier on in the stage than to try to, fix it all later in post. Some basses like this Warwick or like a jazz bass will let you select the pickup too. That can make a huge difference, and that's something you definitely can change in post. Decide on what pickup sound you want, whether you want more of the neck sound, the bridge sound, a nice even blend of both. This one has a active passive switch, EQ on it. There's so many different basses, there's so many different tone options. Research what your bass has, what sort of tone options it has in terms of EQ, active passive, some single coil humbucker, whatever pickup you want to blend in. Take advantage of that, decide on those things nice and early on. The next exciting part of this journey is your cables. I cannot stress this enough. Have functional cables. The cable I was just using is this nice Yorkville cable here. Now, obviously, there's a lot of snake oil when it comes to cables. People try to sell you on, like solid gold, platinum, diamond studded. You don't have to get that crazy with. The main things to look for is one, make sure it's nice and durable. It's nice and thick like this. You want to avoid something like this that's like really thin and flimsy. You also want to make sure it's a cable that you can open up. So if you open up any cable, this is the weakest part right here. That's the soldering joint. So you can actually fix this if it ever, as the cable bends and stuff and gets used, it could break free or whatever. I want to break free! You can actually solder that back into place, which is nice on a little bit more of a high-end cable like this. This guy here, it's kind of all, the plastic is all fused together. There's no way to open this up. This is really what you want to avoid. Don't buy cheap cables like this. buy something that's nice and durable, has a good sleeve on the end. And if it ever does start to crackle, like I said, the problem's likely going to be in this bit here. Open it up if you can, fix it. If not, toss it, get another cable. So the next part in your signal chain, and this is where it gets a little bit contentious, is your effects pedals. So this is my pedal board here, built it myself. I used to work in a cabinet shop, fun fact. Hey, every musician's had a day job at some point, right? A lot of people go against putting effects in your signal chain when you're recording in the studio or whatever. And that is true to an extent. You know, I made in a previous video, I mentioned that almost any great bass tone was just DI. That being said, one advice I got from my friend Brendan Federer from Macondo Studios was, don't be afraid to record a little dirty, especially as a bass player. I mean, how many great guitar recordings were defined by some neat pedal they used, or, you know, the amp they're playing through? You know, and so many guitar players go into the studio, and even if they record clean, they have these ideas about the tone they want. Don't be afraid to take some of those ideas you have about your bass tone and print them into your signal. You know, use some pedals. That being said, my motto has always been, never play clean, but always take a clean signal. For example, in my previous video where I talked about my VT bass DI, I do this all the time where I'll take a parallel clean output, run that into my DI box and interface, but also take a dirty signal so I can blend them together if I want. You know, just send both off to the producer, see what they like. They might end up using one or the other. They might dirty up their own signal. And even if they take the clean signal, hearing your dirty signal will give them some idea about, hey, this is the kind of idea he had that he was going for. Maybe I want to use that. A good example of this was when I was in the studio recording with Cecile Monique for her debut full-length album, Genesis. There's a song, Break, where the guitars are tuned to drop A flat. We were starting to get a little floppy on my bass, and in the intro, we really wanted a really tight sound, something that didn't sound too rattly and jangly. We ended up deciding that, you know, the sound of this octave pedal here in that intro was exactly what that section needed. Kicking into the rest of the song where the guitar is playing a little bit higher, we kept the bass tuned down, playing in, I think the bulk of the song was kind of D flat, C sharp. So I just played that kind of on my 5-string. But yeah, you can hear here that, you know, we have the very tight synth bass kind of sounding thing going on. And then when it gets to the verses, it opens up a bit more. You kind of get a bit more of that kind of like low, rattly string kind of grit. So the next step is a good DI box. So a DI box is pretty industry standard in the recording studio. Any studio I've went into, they always put a DI box between you and the console. There's a lot of physics and stuff going on here that I'm not going to get into today, but essentially just evens out your tone in a nice way. One thing to keep in mind if you are selecting a DI box is, you know, get an active DI box for passive basses, a passive DI box for active basses. And also, if you're lucky, some interfaces have a good instrument input that has a DI circuit built in. For example, my interface here has that. So speaking of interface, I don't know if you can see behind me over kind of there. We have my interface that's actually recording my voice right now, as well as all my bass playing. So an audio interface does two main things. It converts the analog signal of your bass or voice or whatever it may be into a digital signal your computer can read, and then does the reverse, turning the digital signal from your computer into an analog signal you put into a speaker. It also preamps the signal. A lot of different interfaces will have their own preamps that affect the sound in nice little minute ways. The key here is minute. It's kind of icing on the cake. Obviously, like, you can probably like get like Wish.com audio interfaces that's going to have awful preamps that will ruin your sound. But for the most part, any decent interface you get is going to have decent preamps. Some will be marginally better than others, have a little bit different tone quality than others. Preamps, like I said, about many other things, are a whole rabbit hole you could go down. All you gotta know is if you have a half decent interface, the preamps will be pretty good, especially if you got a nice DI box or any sort of signal chain compressors or whatever, leveling out your signal on the way in. Some good interfaces to start with that I recommend for bass players are the ID4, Scarlett 2i2, the Apogee Duet, and the Apollo Twin. The Apollo Twin and ID4, which is the smaller version of my ID44 over here, have a separate DI circuit built in, which is really nice. But yeah, like I said, most interfaces will be able to accommodate a bass going in, or if, like I said, if you got a DI box, you know, that's going to be the bread and butter right there. So once your signal gets to your computer, it's going to end up in your digital audio workstation, or DAW, or DAW for short. So let's head over there and check out what I do, as we industry people call in the box, or in the computer. Let's go take a look at what I'm doing over there. So there's a variety of programs you could use like this, like Ableton, Cubase, Reaper, Pro Tools is obviously pretty industry standard. If you're on a Mac, it's going to come loaded with GarageBand, which can work great for tracking. However, if you're thinking of upgrading to Logic, definitely worth it. It's a good one-time investment. It'll pay off in the long run, trust me. And that's what we're going to be using. We're going to be using Logic today, getting started here. So I'm going to go over here and open up my Logic. Make a new bass tracking. This is just a template I made up here. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to set up your inputs. So over here, obviously I'm not recording any upright today. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. Oh, wrong button. Go ahead and hide those. My dirty channel here is input 3 on my interface. My clean signal is input 2. There we go. Next, you're going to want to grab your bass and open up the level meter. And you're going to want to turn monitoring on for this. So here you're going to set the level meter to peak and RMS. You want the peak below 0, the RMS under -18. So just going to play a bit here. 17.8, that's pretty good. The peak is 7.4. Sorry, -7.4. That's well below 0. The reason we do this is if it goes over peak, it clips, causing distortion. We don't like that. If it goes below -18, you're going to have a really quiet signal, and to bring it up in the mix, you're going to bring up a lot of the noise floor, a lot of the hum and hiss of your signal. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to pull up a level meter, which is right here. Peak and RMS. Monitor. Same thing, -8.7 for RMS. Peak is -9.6 right here. So now, just to show you how to track, I'm just going to bring up a new drummer track. This is just Logic's built-in drum machine. And then going to make up a little line going along to it. It's another common mistake. Make sure you arm both tracks. The last thing you want to do is get to the end of an amazing take and realize, oh, I was only recording one track. If you're doing more than one track like this, that's how you do it. So I'm just going to go record. And you're going to want to get a couple takes. Most programs have an option to layer takes over each other. So we're going to try that again. Cool. Now the next thing you do is you compile them together, or comp as we say. So let's say, I did great on the first take, but screwed it up at the end. The second take was better for that. You just swipe like that. Now you got all of this from the second take, all this from the first take. You're really going to want to do this before you send it to the artist or producer. Please do not send them like 12 different takes and expect them to edit it. This is your job, and you're going to know which parts you play better anyways. So yeah, go ahead and do that. I suggest keeping either a digital or physical notebook nearby to write down as you're playing. Just say like, hey, missed the fill in take 2. Take 3 was good except for the verse, stuff like that. Now you're on to plugins. So this is where I would say be very cautious, be very minimal. You're not the mix engineer, you're the session bassist. You're supposed to provide them, a really good piece of audio for them to kind of mix into the song. There's a few things here I do like to do though. Particularly, I like to sometimes add a little bit of compression and a little bit of EQ, especially here on this dry track. If we listen to it by itself, the playing's actually pretty even. I actually probably wouldn't compress this, but if I did, I would put a very, very subtle compression, something like this. Like literally less than a dB of compression, just enough to kind of even out any little mistakes in your playing. This one I just happened to be perfect. But if there is, if you're doing a really aggressive pick song or whatever, anything that's going to be a little bit uneven, smooth it out a little bit. But I'm just going to leave compression off this time. It's a good option though. The other thing you want to do is kind of give them an idea of the tone you're going for. This I feel like it's a little bit too much heavy in the mids. I'm just going to turn on a tube EQ here. This is an emulation of a Pultec. I'm actually going to turn everything here off Maybe like high boost of 1, a low boost of 1 at around 90. I'm not even going to bother for this low mid. I'm just going to aim for this dip here. Yeah, it should be good about 4. And just very subtle EQ. Just take some of the growliness out of there. I wasn't a huge fan of that. I might even go a little bit less there. That's still even a bit aggressive for me. Take that dip down, take this down. On. Off. Like I said, very, very subtle. Just enough to kind of warm up the sound a little bit. As if you were tracking through that plugin. And that's kind of what I think of with the plugins is I kind of use them because I'm not playing through an 1176 and a Pultec. I don't own those. I'm just putting them in here as if I was tracking with them. But even here, like I said, the playing is so even, I'm not even going to bother compressing it. It's an option though. But like I said, don't get carried away here. Don't start squashing your signal, throwing 10 different EQs on, adding reverb, delays, phasers, all that sort of stuff. Keep it pretty basic here. So here's the least talked about part of recording, and that's how to export your tracks. This is probably the definitive point, the most important thing, and the biggest thing you can mess up. First of all, you want to label your track properly. Here's my system here. And the reason I do this is you don't want to send a producer and artist, track 1 as your file name. They're gonna just drop that into a project full of another 2 million other track 1s and be like, gosh darn, what bass part is this? What version is this? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go, first of all, you want to isolate one track at a time. So I'll go solo. I'll go Command A to highlight all, just to make sure I get the whole track. And then I go Command B to bounce it. You can also find bounce over here. You're going to want to do wave, 24-bit, sample rate 44-100, interleaved, and no dithering. This is the standard. Always go this way unless someone else tells you otherwise. Dithering, you always want to leave off. This isn't the master track. This is just one track going into a tune. Interleaved, that just means that if a track has been recorded stereo, it'll stay as one stereo track instead of splitting it into 2. Sample rate, like I said, this is pretty industry standard unless someone tells you otherwise. And you could always ask, just say, what sample rate is this project in? 24-bit, same thing. It's pretty standard unless someone says otherwise. Same with wave. So from here, you're going to go there. And I'm just going to call this bass tracking is the name of the song. Going with my my thing again there. So I'm going to go, the part is the bass part. That's the function in the song. The instrument, it was recorded on my P bass. And this is the clean DI track. Then the bounce number, this is bounce number 1. This is the first bounce I'm sending them. If they come back to me and say, hey, I want you to redo this, different feel, fix this part, whatever, record another version. The date today is 04/20/2069. And we're going to bounce that. There we go, done. And then same for the other track. So I'll go here, same thing, Command All, bounce, go out. It's the same thing, P bass. The only thing I'm going to change here is this is the dirty DI track. Still bounce 1, still the date is 04/20/2069, bounce. So that's how you export the track. Obviously make sure it clicks off, you're soloed, other tracks are muted, made that mistake a lot. It's probably going to be too big of a file to send over email. You're going to be using Dropbox, WeTransfer, or Google Drive. Make sure you set the permissions so that the person receiving it can access it. That's really embarrassing to get that email back the next day being like, hey man, could you let me access the file? That's always really embarrassing, so make sure you do that. Even better, sometimes set it so that anyone with the link can download. This makes it easy if they want to forward your email off to the next guy and say record guitar to this bass part and this drum part or whatever. It just makes it easier for them. So there you have it. That's all the mechanics behind how you're going to be recording bass tracks from home. Same in the studio. A lot of these things still apply. You're just outsourcing all the kind of tech stuff to someone else. Someone else is going to do that work for you. But same things apply. Make sure you got a good bass tuned up, good signal flow going into whatever studio gear there is there. So if you got any use out of this video, give it a like. I'm going to be doing a second part to this where I go through how to actually come up with a good bass line. Now since you got everything wired together, all the nerdy stuff is done, now we can get into some real playing. So stay tuned for that. If you want to see that video coming out, feel free to subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that fun jazz, and I'll see you around. Wanna break free?